Hello and welcome. In this lecture, we're going to be talking a little bit about how to present your project ideas in a way that is effective and increases the likelihood that your project actually goes forward. So if you've spent a lot of time thinking about your project, you have all the pieces together, you have it all planned out, at some point you're going to go to your stakeholders and present it to them to describe what you want to do and explain why it's a wise thing for your organization to pursue. Now, in some senses, we think that if we present something and the facts just support it, that will necessarily mean that, of course, people will do it. And that is hopefully the primary reason why people make choices around this and administrators make choices around this. But the truth is that there is a very strong social component to presentations in terms of convincing people that this is something that they should be excited about and that they really want to invest money and effort into. So it's worth thinking about these presentations fairly carefully beforehand and using some different strategies to try and increase the probability that your work will go forward. So this lecture really is formed primarily out of my own personal experience with these types of situations. There's some things I've learned and there's some things that I've been taught by my various mentors over the years. So I wouldn't describe the things I tell you as being pure fact, but I think that based on my experience, they might be things that will help you as you go forward. So the first thing that you want to think about when you're approaching doing a presentation is you'll obviously be talking to somebody to get that presentation scheduled. When you're doing so, you want to think about who among your stakeholders, who among the people you're working with knows a lot about the group that you'll be presenting to. So you're going to go and talk to them as a friend and try and learn a little bit about what that presentation might look like and what you can do to sort of customize what you're doing to that sort of approach. So the first thing to note is just in different contexts, a presentation is going to look very different. Different types of meetings, different types of structures will require a different type of approach. So in this lecture, I can't give you a formula for what will work in all situations. The point here is just that by talking to somebody about what's expected or what is sort of standard in this type of circumstance, you'll really set yourself up well to do something that is done in a way that's familiar and makes sense to the people that you're presenting to. So thinking about the structure and style of presentations that have occurred previously. For example, some organizations use SBAR for all their communications. You can adopt that style to your presentation if that seems to be how most people do that. But project presentations may have other components that you want to bring in, or maybe they're done somewhat differently in other contexts. So talking about it and learning about it beforehand is useful. If possible, if you've never presented in this context before, it might be worth asking that person if there's any examples of what other people have done to present. This might help you to just see generally what is done. Of course, you'll customize your own thing, but examples can help. You also might want to know a little bit about the setting where you would be doing your presentation. So is in the room where you would be doing PowerPoints? Is there a whiteboard? Who's going to be there? Knowing the stakeholders that will be there is really crucial because you can plan for that in terms of what you decide to talk about. The other thing is once you get accepted for doing this presentation to promote your project, it's sometimes helpful, and if this is possible, you might want to get an idea of what they want from you, right? What type of presentation they want. So if you go into a presentation and you prepare you have 1 hour and you prepare a 50-minute long presentation with 10 minutes for questions, when what they really wanted was for you to talk for 15 minutes and for the rest to be conversation, then you have a problem because they're going to be sitting there tapping their fingers waiting for you to be quiet so that you can all talk about this, right? So knowing what they're actually expecting and wanting from you is actually really important beforehand. So don't forget to ask about that too. That can really help you out. All right, so we've already talked about stakeholder analyses in previous talks, But the stakeholder analysis is really going to be quite important for your presentation, right? So what this does is allows you to think about who you're talking to and develop a communication strategy that is customized to their interests, right? So again, the idea here is that you want to present in a way that highlights the interests of the people that you're talking to. Instead of talking about what you want and what you think is the best thing, you kind of want to talk about what they want and what can make them happy and promote their efforts and interests, right? So seeing through the audience's eyes is really going to help you design your approach and structure. Stakeholder analyses will also give you some idea of who might be the best person to present. Always remember, you might be, as a person who's organizing things, you might be the best person to present. But sometimes, if you have somebody you're working closely with who has more clout or more connections in the context of the people who will be there, maybe they're the person who should take the lead on this presentation. Another thing to think about as you approach this presentation is how do you want to frame what you're doing? Do you want to frame it as we have this whole thing that's entirely laid out, all you have to do is approve it? That can have advantages if people just want to know that it's ready to go and you can just go forward with it. But in other contexts, it might actually be a bad thing. Like some stakeholders, if you give them a pre-organized product, they actually wanted to have say in what was put together. So sometimes for those folks, you want to describe it as we have this idea and it's sort of at an early stage and we want to get an idea of what you think about this and have it be more of a conversation about building this together, right? So that framing can be quite important. And of course, there's many different possibilities in between that, of having some rudimentary ideas versus, a fairly well-developed plan with a lot of feedback to having a fully fleshed out program. So something that's incredibly important as you go into this is brainstorming what types of questions or objections you might see in this conversation. This is really important because it allows you to plan for them beforehand and structure your talk appropriately. And it also prepares for you to be able to craft these sort of smooth and convincing responses so that someone asks you a question and you can quickly and easily and fluidly respond to it, as opposed to having to try and poke through your papers or figure things out. So by spending a little time thinking about your stakeholders, what they want and what they think about, and thinking about where the strengths and weaknesses of your proposal are, this will help you to prepare to be able to address those questions as best you can and do so well. Related to that is really the idea that in some cases in presentations, you'll have to deal with disagreement. So the first thing about disagreement or conflict in these types of conversations is to remember that they can be productive. This is not necessarily something that's a bad thing. In the sense that any program, no matter how carefully designed by a small group of people, can typically be improved. There's often insights or perspectives that can lead to new ideas or new approaches. So this disagreement or these alternate views don't necessarily have to be viewed as a negative thing when someone brings up something that pushes against what you're proposing. The reason that this is important is that framing it in this way is going to be helpful for you to not get too stressed out when you do get these inevitable disagreements. If you can frame it as a productive dialogue, as interesting ideas or ways to think about things, it's really going to help the whole conversation and keep your conversation in a positive light. So one of the worst things that can happen in a presentation is if there's some disagreement and it turns into a really hard conflict where people get upset. This can really throw an entire conversation off track, and it can leave everybody feeling a little bit bad about the whole idea and the project and just want to avoid it, right? So this is something that you want to avoid doing if it's possible. And there's some ways to do this. So preparing So the more you prepare, the more you're going to be able to direct that conversation, because you're going to anticipate those conflicts, hopefully, and you'll be able to direct it in ways that sort of diffuse the tension there, right? And direct it in a way that is productive, right? The other thing that's important in preparing is, as you think about these different possibilities, is to anticipate and plan for your emotional response in a disagreement, right? So if you think about these different things that people could say that might be critical of your project that clearly you care about and you think is a great idea, thinking about it fairly from their point of view will help you to step away from your own feelings and getting upset. Because if you start getting really upset in a presentation, that again can lead things in directions you don't want to go. The other thing that's really helpful in dealing with disagreement sometimes is to, if you think that there might be disagreements or concerns, to actually bring them up before people have to bring it up themselves, right? What this does is it allows you to address them fairly, right? It allows you to present those ideas and to present your solutions to them before other solutions are brought up. So if you present your solutions early, then it starts getting people on track. And the other thing is if people are sitting there thinking about the thing that they disagree with you about the whole time, and they're waiting to get the courage up or, to disagree with you publicly, they're going to be distracted, right? And that's not a positive thing. So they'll also respect the fact that you've brought up those other points of view yourself, that you've actually been considerate of other perspectives. It's actually a helpful strategy very often in these types of conversations. So as I've mentioned, when we think about logic models or different things, it's really important not just to think about what could work, but also think about what could go wrong. What are the potential problems with your plan, right? Where are the hitches? Where are the things that if something fails, it might fall through? What are the challenges or problems that could come up? So this is going to be really helpful for you as well. So if you have these concerns, it's helpful to sort of sometimes contextualize in larger benefits. So you say, here's potential concerns, they're real, but there's overall, this is going to make result in benefits for patients and nurses or for the organization and budgets, whatever it happens to be. And switching it to present it as, again, a challenge or a problem that we can work on to solve together. And again, if you have a solution already that you can propose to begin, that will start directing things in the direction that you actually want the conversation to go. Now, in these disagreements, it's also helpful, as you think about these different perspectives, to figure out what you can adjust if you need to, and where you really can't. So understanding if your project is going to work, what do you have flexibility and what do you not have flexibility? So you can sort of express that as you go forward and explain your justification and reasoning for that if you do get pushback on certain ideas that you're presenting. Now, another thing with presentations that's important to note is that these initial steps in a project, again, different perspectives can lead you in productive directions, and they can improve your project. And that's one of the real benefits of getting these different ideas, right? Now, the other side to disagreements is that people might also be really enthusiastic about this, and that's a great thing. But enthusiastic people often also bring up a ton of very well-meaning suggestions, right? And some of these suggestions might lead you very far astray from what you were hoping to do. So this is important to keep in mind as you have this conversation, because it's very easy to get into a presentation where you start agreeing to or making promises or giving the impression that you're going to do a lot more things than you actually were prepared to do, or you think that you could feasibly do effectively. Again, that's something you need to be watching for. So think about how you would plan to respond to this. So you don't want to prematurely quash any sort of excitement by anything that somebody says. You push it down and say, no, we can't do that, we can't do that, we can't do that. But be prepared to describe, which things you can you can adopt and pull in, and which things might push things too far in a certain direction. And again, it's always helpful sometimes to contextualize with everybody the importance of keeping the scope narrow and allowing yourself to sort of have early successes. And of course, there's always that thing that you could say, which is, that's a really interesting idea. We should really think about doing that once we have this stuff in place, right? That's another way to handle this, which can be quite helpful. All right, here's some important superficialities. Now, what I mean by superficialities is these are things that are social, and maybe they shouldn't matter, but they often do. So think about them, plan for them, just because sometimes this can make a difference, unfortunately, or fortunately, as the case may be. So when you think about a presentation, you can think about it similarly to an interview. So interviews look like many different things. There's different kinds of interviews, but think about it as an opportunity to present yourself in the best light, present your ideas in the best light. Now, it's okay to act a little bit in this context. Now, all of us hold many different personalities. We're not a single person. We exist in different ways. So you want to think about what type of expression of yourself that feels genuine and authentic can you express in that context. And the ones that really are helpful in project presentations are ways of expressing confidence and precision in what you're saying, and fairness and honesty and thoughtfulness. Those are things that people want to see in a presenter. So trying to essentially psych yourself up to express those elements of yourself can actually be useful for a presentation. And this can express itself in different ways, right? So friendliness and humor can be a way to sort of connect with one another, with others. Of course, you don't want to overdo it, right? You don't want to be over friendly, especially if there's a hierarchy that you're dealing with. You could get, cause challenges in that way. So thinking about what is the appropriate thing here, and when is it appropriate to have a little bit of humor and friendliness there. But thinking about the acting element and the friendliness element to this thing is important. So when I've done this in various different contexts, I often go into these interview or presentation contexts with the attitude of essentially presenting myself as thinking that everybody in that room is a friend, or at least a friendly mentor, right? Who may or may not disagree with and push you, but they're a friendly mentor. And if you can come at this with that perspective, as opposed to being afraid of your audience or feel withdrawn, it's going to make a big difference in terms of your ability to connect with them. So thinking about how you can make that mental shift can be valuable. Again, the formality thing can be important. So understanding who you're talking to and what the context is and how they exist as people, that can sometimes be something that a friendly stakeholder can give you some insight into. Generally, like an interview, you want to think about your appearance. Generally speaking, it's probably good to be roughly similar to the way that you normally think of an interview, which is typically you want to be a little bit formal than probably what you expect your audience to be. That's sort of a general good rule of thumb. You don't want to be extremely formal to show up in your tux when people are in scrubs, right? So that is, so you want to sort of hit it just a little bit higher. And again, somebody can possibly give you some insight into that. All right, so presentations themselves. When you're doing a presentation, there's different ways to do it. There are PowerPoint presentations, which is a common way to do it in certain contexts. In other contexts, you just show up and you talk informally and organically. There's also presentations where you could go and work through documents, for example. That can be the thing that you're centering your presentation around. This is going to look very different in different contexts, and of course, you'll learn that from talking to your stakeholders. Something I would say that is is a pretty strong recommendation is that, generally speaking, for many presentations, it's more important to be able to talk organically and in a way that connects with your audience than it is to be exactly precise or to cover all the information that you want to cover in a perfect order, right? So people using note cards or using other things like that, you're actually probably better off just trying to figure out what you want to say, maybe have some notes in front of you, but more or less talk as you would normally and really try to connect with people as you're talking. That's hard, right? It's a learned skill, but it is much more likely to lead to an engaging conversation. So very often the most popular types of conversations around this type of thing are talking organically and maybe for imagery using perhaps a handout sheet and writing on the whiteboard. A lot of people use PowerPoints too. And PowerPoints may be sort of the standard way that people do things. And if that's the case, that's fine for you to use that strategy. And sometimes when you're trying to cover a lot of material in a very specific way, it can be helpful for organizing your conversation. But there's some things with PowerPoints that are pitfalls, right? They can be really boring. There can be challenges for attention and engagement. And in case you're snickering as you're watching this video is not actually really designed to be the most engaging PowerPoint slides that you could possibly see. They're mainly bullet points, and that's partially because I want you to be able to go and look through these slides and understand and remind yourself of the contents. But if I were doing this as a presentation, I'd be using a lot more images, less text, and organizing it differently, right? So there are other types of you would do this somewhat differently. So the challenges for attention engagement is very often if someone is just reading the bullet points on a presentation, you all know that that's the worst thing in the world, right? So that can be incredibly boring. So that can be hard, especially if you have slides that have a massive amount of information on them. That's incredibly difficult. One thing that is a helpful tool that a lot of people don't know about is a blank button, right? So PowerPoint slides and most presentation slides, there's usually a button that you can press that makes the screen go black. So what this is really useful for is if you want to present some slides, but in between them to black out the screen and talk organically. So people are looking at you and engaging with you as a speaker, right? So that's a helpful tool that can be useful in these types of presentations. Templates can be helpful for having a clean presentation that looks good. Very often a lot of organizations have their templates, so you could find out if there is a template for your hospital, for example, that you could use. Have an outline in your presentation if you're doing PowerPoint so that people know where you're going with your presentation. So have the 5 or 6 different steps things that you're going to tell them from the beginning. And as you go through the different slides, have those steps at sort of as you transition between them. I would encourage you to, as much as possible, emphasize images if that's appropriate to the project that you're doing. People tend to learn better with images. They tend to work better for talking through them. That's not always possible, but I do recommend that as a general strategy. Try to reduce text. If you look at a bullet point, try and bring that down as tightly as possible while still conveying the essential information that you need. Remember, your words, what you're saying, should be primarily responsible for what they're paying attention to. If you're just reading off the slides, which is the tendency when you write a lot there, it's really deadly. So keep it really short. That's so that people keep it in their mind, but don't write too much. And you're thinking, even the slide that you're looking at right now, this is a lot of text. I wouldn't go way too much more than this for a lot of things, if at all possible. And generally speaking, your goal here is to try and keep things simple. So that means don't have lots of really crazy animations. That means don't have a ton of colors going on in the background so people can't see things. There's real advantages to keep it simple so that people aren't distracted or trying to figure out what's going on. And again, so that they're paying attention to what you're saying in your presentation. All right. So very often in healthcare settings or other settings, you're not going to be doing a PowerPoint slide. You might be using handouts. Now, handouts are actually useful whether or not you're using PowerPoint slides. People like to see information put right in front of them. And very often, if you have handouts that have space that they can write in, it's helpful for them to be able to take notes as they're listening to what you're saying. So this can be a really useful strategy for people. There's also this thing of giving gifts where like even just giving people a page tends to, or pencil or something like that, a page and a pencil, they tend to like that, and it tends to result in them being favorably inclined towards you. So this is something that can be helpful. So having that there can be quite useful. It's useful for directing conversations, and having something like an agenda before you have your meeting. If it's you who sets the agenda, they may set the agenda, so you might have no control over it. But giving them an outline of what you're going to talk about is still going to be relevant. Having a one-page summary of the key points that you want them to take away is important, so they don't have to take too many notes, and so they have this to hold on to. And maybe having your logic model and possibly an image of some sort, perhaps your theory of change, right, can be useful in this context. So these are the things that you can do with a handout that can be quite handy. And it can be a very helpful structural tool. So again, these are all some ideas around how to prepare for a presentation. Again, as you're thinking about it, practice your talk, practice what you're going to say, do it from somebody who cares about you, who is also willing to give you constructive criticism and whose opinion you trust, and who is familiar with what you're doing. As you prepare, you really want to think about how you want to organize it so that you can also plan for disagreements and scope shifts, and you can plan how you want to address it and direct those conversations to increase the probability that it will go in the direction that you want. And also you want to plan for your emotions and your emotional response to this type of situation, right? So the more that you think about it, the more that you recognize the different possibilities that are there, perhaps it will give you more insight so that you can prepare and be aware of your own emotions in a presentation setting. All right, so those are just some suggestions I have for thinking about presentations and thinking about how to make your presentations more effective. These are mainly things that I've used myself and that have been taught by my mentors at various different points. I found them to be useful, and that's why I'm sharing them. Of course, everybody will have their own approach and style, and I would very much suggest that you talk to stakeholders who are your friends to get their perspectives on what to do. But, these are just some general things to think about in terms of designing these, taking a strategic approach to your project presentations. And again, here I'm focusing on being strategic, thinking about the fact that in healthcare settings, there's many different projects that could be taken on, and that there will be choices that will be made. And you're trying to think strategically about how you can improve the probability that your project actually will go forward and will get approved and will get the funding that you need for it to be successful. So anyway, that's just my 2 cents on how to do this. I hope it was helpful, and thanks for listening. I hope it was useful, and I hope you have many successful presentations to come. So take care and be well.